Okay, so we are picking up on Roman numeral 29, bottom paragraph. And as those of you guys who've been coming every week notice, there's only one David tonight. The other David is having an amazing time on an Alaskan cruise with his loving wife, Karen. So he is not here. So I asked Heather, who's one of my sponsees, to join me. She's going to do the reading tonight, and she's going to be contributing with some content as well. So let's do this, Heather.
All right, so are we going to start at the bottom of that page? I do not hold.
Yep.
All right. I do not hold with those who believe that alcoholism is entirely a problem of mental control. I have had many men who had, for example, worked a period of months on some problem or business deal which was to be settled on a certain date, favorably to them. They took a drink a day or so prior to the date, and then the phenomenon of craving at once became paramount to all other interests, so that the important appointment was not met. These men were not drinking to escape, they were drinking to overcome a craving beyond their mental control.
Go ahead,
I have some definitions. I'm going to reiterate phenomenon of craving. So phenomenon is the rare event, and craving is an abnormal desire as for a drug. And then I always put in parentheses alcohol, because that's what we're talking about here. And then also paramount. So that is the highest rank. So they took a drink a day or so prior to the date, and then the rare event of an abnormal desire for a drug or alcohol at once became the highest rank to all other interests, so that the important appointment was not met.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cool. Hey, David, can we do a quick exercise with everybody? The
Absolutely.
3 craziest things. So everybody just take a minute to write down the 3 craziest things that you've ever done in your life. Just take 1 minute to write those 3 craziest things down, and then we're going to kind of loop back to it. And David, why don't you follow up on that part?
Sure. Okay, so remember the context of where we are here, guys. And the other David repeats this, almost every week while we're in the doctor's opinion and elsewhere as we're going through the book too. From the doctor's opinion, these early 10 pages, right, through page 23, this is largely a study of the physical part of our illness, right? Our allergic reaction, our craving to alcohol. So the doctor is pounding home again this important concept. He's saying, I don't hold with those who believe that alcoholism is entirely a problem of mental control. Remember, a couple of weeks ago, I brought up the paper that Dr. Silkworth had published in 1937, where he made this point of saying, hey, all of you, my peers, all you other physicians, you don't really understand alcoholism. What you and and me and the rest of the medical industry have always believed is that if somebody wanted to stop drinking bad enough, they would choose to stop drinking. And so what Dr. Silkworth is reminding us is that we don't have that luxury. Not the real alcoholic is described in the book. So he's saying alcohol is not entirely a problem of mental control, right? So that I can just declare I'm going to stop and stay stopped. And he's saying I have many men who had, an example, worked a period of months on a deal. And this is an allusion to Bill Wilson as an example. And in Bill's story, he talks about this. Bill was the stockbroker, the stock speculator, and as he was going down in his drinking, his work career was up and down, getting worse. But it's the story, and Joe and Charlie do such a wonderful job of telling sort of the extended version of the events of how this happened as well. But ultimately, he was given an opportunity to pull himself back together, right, and to be involved in making some money. And at the 11th hour, he drank and blew this. And I'll just share, heartbreakingly, I have seen this experience too, not necessarily just with people as it relates to their job, but I knew a guy who wasn't even allowed to see his children. He hadn't been able to see him for a couple of years, and he was in treatment, and he was getting better, and he was so excited he was going to be able to go to court just to get supervised visits with his kids. And the night before court, he drank. Never got to see those kids again. Right? This is the stuff that happens to us. Would any of us be here tonight? There's 40 of us here in this meeting. Would any of us be here tonight if we had the mental control? This is the doctor's point. Okay? So the phenomenon of craving at once became paramount to all other interests. So again, and Howard sent a note to us, or sent it to David last week, being like, we kept talking about the phenomenon of craving, because, that's what we're talking about here in the book. It's not so much a phenomenon anymore, right? It's evolved past that. We now understand the sort of biology and the genetics behind it. We understand what it does in our bodies, how alcohol affects us. And phenomena are sort of rare and unusual and can't be explained. That's not what our understanding is today. We understand the physical allergy, the craving, our abnormal response to alcohol. But the point that the doctor's making here is that obsession, we can't control it. We have the first drink, the craving kicks in, and then, the important appointment wasn't met. These men were not drinking to escape. They were drinking to overcome a craving beyond their mental control. Later in the book challenges us to say, try to stop drinking abruptly. There's a couple of tests that come up later in the book, an obsession test and an allergy test. The allergy test is, if I start drinking, can I just stop? In my experience, and I'm guessing the experience of those who are here tonight, the answer is no. Now, could we once in a while? Did we get lucky sometimes? Yeah. But I always ask, if I pointed a gun at your head and said, will you guarantee you're only going to have 2 drinks tonight instead of 22? Would you be able to stop? Guessing no. Yeah, a lot of shaking heads. Go ahead, Heather.
Yeah, I had a similar experience with this in the book. My ex-husband had filed for full custody of my kids, and so I couldn't quit drinking, and I went to an outpatient treatment program. And the last day before I got out, I drank, and I knew that if I didn't pass that program, that I was going to lose my kids. And by the grace of God, they didn't drug test me that very last day. But that threat to lose my kids, they are my biggest blessing. If you're a parent here, you understand that love for you that you have for a child. There is nothing greater. And I have no power, no choice, no control.
Are you going to pay off that exercise just everybody to do, or is that going to happen later?
Oh, so I was going to have you do that part, but I could. Those 3 things, the craziest thing that you ever did. The craziest thing that we ever did was take that first drink. And David, follow that up.
Yeah, I wonder what ended up on everybody's list, right? Drank and drove, left my kids at home while I went to the bar, right? Went home with strangers. We all did these things, dicey situations. Are those the craziest things we ever did? Or what Heather's driving at is, maybe the craziest thing we ever did was pick up a drink, knowing what happens after we pick up that drink. If we had the mental control that the doctor's saying we don't have, again, we wouldn't be here and this wouldn't be an issue. And God bless those people in our lives. The people I always talk about, my buddies who I grew up with and I went to school with, I was in fraternity with. They were all certain kind of hard drinker. The book describes that when they got older, they learned to moderate or stop altogether, right? They got married, they had kids, they got promotions, right? They had that mental control that I didn't. All right, let's plow forward.
All right, on to the next page. There are many situations which arise out of the phenomenon of craving, which cause men to make the supreme sacrifice rather than to continue to fight.
I had supreme sacrifice, which is the sacrifice of one's own life. So in the sentence, there are many situations which arise out of the phenomenon of craving, which cause men to sacrifice one's own life rather than continue to fight.
So supreme sacrifice is a euphemism for committing suicide. So what's being said here, as Sam just elucidated, can't overcome the craving, helpless, don't feel like we've got another way out, commit suicide rather than continue to fight. you've been around a little bit, you may have experienced this sadly in the rooms of your fellowship. Again, unfortunately, I have as well. Sometimes it's overt suicide, overdose, hanging, all these awful things. I don't need to get into it because I don't want to trigger anybody here who's experienced any of this stuff. Sometimes it's inadvertent suicide, right? There's many ways to die from this illness, directly or indirectly. But I think that the key phrase here beyond the supreme sacrifice is rather than continue to fight. It's a progressive illness, right? Over time. It's always worse, never better. And so what each of us has to come to is the point, what's my tolerance level? And I'm not talking about my ability to drink. How much can I tolerate in my life as I'm descending downhill? And it's different for every person.
I think we get stuck in that the cycle, and that craving comes on, and if we have untreated alcoholism, I know you guys haven't gotten into the spiritual malady and the bedevilments too much, but that's that restless, irritable, and discontent that the doctor speaks about. And if we're not treating that, once we get to that craving, we're always going to drink again if we're not working the spiritual solution. And that was explained. I think you guys explained that last week while going over that. That's the doctor's opinion.
Mm-hmm. And the cycle's right? One page before, this was at the top of Roman numeral 29. We succumb to the desire again because of our mental obsession. Phenomenon of craving develops, or let's just call it the craving develops, as we know, and we pass through the well-known stage of spree, emerging remorseful, firm resolution not to drink again. But that resolution gets smashed time and time again.
All right, so we're going to get into the next part, and I'm going to break up these paragraphs. We're just going to go a couple sentences at a time. The classification of alcoholics seems most difficult, and in much detail is outside of the scope of the book. There are, of course, the psychopaths who are emotionally unstable. We are all familiar with this type. They are always going on the wagon for keeps. They are over remorseful and make resolutions, but never a decision. So we're going over the different types of alcoholics here, and this is type 1. This is a good paragraph to ask ourselves these questions. Did I come to and feel remorseful? Did I come to and say I was never going to drink again? Did I make resolutions that I quit by New Year's, that I quit by this day or that day, and it just, always continue to drink again? So can I relate to that? Ask yourselves those questions. For me, for sure.
Go ahead, Sam.
I did have the definition for psychopaths, and then I did define going on the wagon for keeps. So psychopaths is a person affected by neurosis. Neurosis. Thank you. Psychoneurosis. And then I got the idea from Heather, and she got it from Paige to define psychoneurosis as a functional disorder of the mind and nerves. And so it is a person who is affected by a functional disorder of the mind and nerves. They're, of course, the psychopaths who are emotionally unstable, and then they're always going on the wagon for keeps, is abstaining from alcohol. They're over remorseful and making many resolutions, but never a decision.
So the doctor's starting out by saying the classification of alcoholics seems most difficult. Yeah, that feels like a massive understatement, right? Because he goes on to say in much detail is outside the scope of the book. And there's a few other spots in the book where there's sort of different kinds and categories and types of alcoholics are discussed, right? There's a nice 4 categories in the chapter to wives, and we've got this one here, and then we've got more about alcoholism. And then, as Heather said, this is type number 1. There's going to be a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that are discussed here. These are not the only classifications of alcoholism. All right, there are different kinds of alcoholics, and I think the doctor's larger point is this is just exemplary of some, but we could go on and on and on and define them in many different ways. So psychopaths, that was, I mean, I don't know that any of us knows what psychoneurosis is. I don't, and I like to think I'm a vocabulary guy, but we know psychopath, at least to our understanding, somebody who's fairly deranged, you know. And so they're emotionally unstable. That's probably a gross understatement as well. We're all familiar with this type. Are we all familiar with this type? You know, what is that type? Well, that's the type that's always going on the wagon for keeps. They're over remorseful and make many resolutions, but never a decision. So this is talks about people that are emotionally unstable, constantly saying they're going to get better. They have an unreasonable emotional response to their failure. They're over remorseful. They're constantly making resolutions, but never a decision, right? Never making the decision to give it up for good. Probably never making the decision to turn their will and their life over to the care of God in 3, and many other decisions along the way.
All right. So now we're going to go on to type 2. There is the type of man who is unwilling to admit that he cannot take a drink. He plans various ways of drinking. He changes his brand or his environment. So can we relate to that? You know, if I thought that my problem was hard liquor, so I switched to just soft. Did I think my problem was wine, so I drank beer? Did I switch substance to substance, trying to control it? You know, I know for me that was a big thing. Hey, my problem it's alcohol, so I can smoke weed like a lady, or you know, it's just weed that's my problem. I can you know, replace my problem with alcoholism with chasing something else to fix that hole.
Sam, did you have any definitions in this one?
No,
okay.
Not yet.
So the type of man who's unwilling to admit that he cannot take a drink. I suspect for most of us on this call, in my experience, we were all that person at some point. I'm not sure that I ever considered myself a psychopath. I wouldn't have used that word, right, from type 1. But fairly emotionally unstable for sure. There's some words I can relate to. Pretty easily to relate to unwilling to admit that he cannot take a drink. In fact, when I first came into recovery, I went into one of our sister fellowships, my first few meetings, Narcotics Anonymous, because I didn't know anything about AA, CA, BAA. I certainly didn't know anything about NA either. I thought I was just going to go there and they were going to help me figure out how to not use cocaine anymore or to moderate it, because the thought of not taking a drink, that I was unable to continue to drink, I couldn't crystallize that until I got more honest as I went to more and more meetings. Plans various ways of drinking, changes his brand or his environment, right? And we know later in more about alcoholism as well, there's this whole great list of all the things that we try, you know, to stop our drinking, and failing in all of them.
Right, type 3. There is the type who always believes that after being entirely free from alcohol for a period of time, he can take a drink without danger. So have I had an experience where I've been sober for a period of time and then I pick up again?
So Howard just sent us a nice definition too. Thank you, Howard. Psychopaths, a person whose behavior is harmful to the welfare of others, displaying antisocial behaviors. So that's a much harder definition, right, than I think that we suggest and what's even in the book, right? Antisocial behavior harmful to the welfare of others. Go ahead on number 3 there, Heather. I'm sorry, I preempted you a little bit by circling back. Did you get me or no? Oh yeah, sorry, go ahead.
There's the type who always believes that after being entirely my thing is breaking up. You guys are breaking up like crazy, so hopefully you can hear me okay.
Go ahead.
You want me to read that part again?
Yeah, go ahead. And then go ahead and talk to it.
All right. Type 3. There is the type who always believes that after being entirely free from alcohol for a period of time, he cannot take a drink without danger. So, have I had an experience where I've been sober for a period of time and then pick up again? Can you guys relate to that?
So yeah, so again, a very relatable type of drinker, right? Can't I say that I am in control if I've been entirely free for a period of time, right? If I stop drinking, doesn't that prove that I'm in control and I'm better and I'm safer? I don't know what your particular experiences have been, but in mine and those of many people I've witnessed in recovery, what's actually happened was the opposite. And that after a period of time, a period of physical sobriety or abstinence, when it gets picked back up, it's actually far worse than when I put it down. Go ahead, I'm 4.
All right. So, type 4, manic depressive type, who is perhaps the least understood by his friends and about whom a whole chapter could be written.
I do have have defined manic depressive. So manic, I looked up manic and it's just one affected by mania. So the definition of mania is violent insanity with wild excitement.
Mm.
And then depressive, depression, the definition of that is inability to concentrate, insomnia, loss of appetite, feelings of extreme sadness, guilt, helplessness, hopelessness, and even thoughts of death. So it's just a violent insanity with a person with violent insanity with wild excitement of ranges of emotions and just having a lot of helplessness and hopelessness and even thoughts of death. So
Makes sense.
mhm.
So this isn't talking about the bipolar manic depressive. This is talking about just those wild swings of emotions, and ask yourself if that's something you can relate to. I know for me, that's a hell yes. So yeah, that's all.
Yeah. I know Heather is resisting. Her favorite page is 52 with the bedevilments. One of those bedevilments, just because we're trying not to go forward too many times too quickly, but one of those is about the inability to control our emotional nature. And you see that coming up here multiple times in these types. I cannot control my emotional nature. I am too high. I am too low. I am too quick to anger. I am overly remorseful. Everything is in extreme. I have no sense of balance or moderation in my experience as I travel through life. Okay? Both is this manic depressive type and several of the other types and classifications as well. Okay? The least understood by his friends, probably true, because when I am living in this wild vacillation of emotion as I experience life, and the people around me don't know, oh my God, here comes David. Is he going to be crazy, David? Is he going to be sad, David? How can we predict and expect to be around him when we don't know how he's going to behave? It's very difficult for the people around me to understand. And it says, most difficult for least understood by his friends. How about our family? How about how we've punished them as emotional hostages by taking them along this emotional roller coaster with us?
All right, so then we'll get into type 5. Then there are types entirely normal in every respect, except in the effect alcohol has upon them. They are often able, intelligent, and friendly people. Now this is the one that I do not relate to. But you got any definitions, Sam?
No, so Heather's the exception to the rule, because here's my experience. Whenever I read these 5 types in a group full of recovering drunks of various sort of levels of recovery, everyone else says they can relate to number 5 because this is our experience of ourselves until we've learned a little bit more, right? Oh yeah, this is me. I was very normal. I was a good friend. I was a good boyfriend, good dad, Oh, except when I drank, I sort of got into trouble. Able, intelligent, friendly. for sure, I know plenty of alcoholics who fit this category. Later on in the book as well, we talk about the Jekyll and Hyde, very common to the drinker. You know, when I'm being Dr. Jekyll, able, intelligent, friendly, and other David says this all the time, never met a dumb alcoholic. Right? We are sharp people. Do we do a lot of stupid things? Absolutely. But I don't know any dumb ones. Who is better at getting out of scrapes than we are? Who's better at talking our ways out of situations than we are? Very few. Maybe just those psychopaths or those sociopaths. Maybe they're the only people who've got a leg up on us. Right? We're very bright. I'm going to share. Howard, it's so great. Here's a little nugget, guys. In the original manuscript, there was a sixth type. So everybody get your pens out if you haven't been taking notes already. Then there are those who are never properly adjusted to life, who are the so-called neurotics. Again, can't control their emotional nature. And the prognosis of this type is unfavorable. Neurotics are emotionally and mentally disturbed, often accompanied by phobias and abnormal behaviors. And I'm going to share this with you guys in the chat. That's a great one. Thank you, Howard. Sixth type in the original manuscript. And if you've never seen that, the original manuscript's available online and in several different formats of books. All right, let's do this, Heather. Keep rolling.
All these and many others have one symptom in common. They cannot start drinking without developing the phenomenon of craving. This phenomenon, as we have suggested, may be the manifestation of an allergy, which differentiates these people and sets them apart as a distinct entity. It has never been, by any treatment with which we are familiar, permanently eradicated. The only relief we have to suggest is entire abstinence.
I did want to reiterate manifestation and allergy. So manifestation is to make clear or evident. An allergy is an abnormally high sensitivity to certain substances. I put in parentheses, alcohol. So where is it? This phenomenon, as we have suggested, may make clear or evident of an allergy, which is the abnormally high sensitivity to certain substances. And then I also have eradicated, which is completely destroyed or removed from existence. So it has never been, by any treatment with which we are familiar, permanently, completely destroyed or removed the existence. The only relief we have to suggest is entire abstinence.
So all these types and many others, I said it could go on in great detail outside this book, have one symptom in common. Guys, this is what differentiates the real alcoholic from other kinds of drinkers. Right? One symptom in common: they cannot start drinking without developing the phenomenon of craving. The real alcoholic, according to the description, the belief system here in this book called Alcoholics Anonymous, is that to be a real alcoholic, one breaks out in craving. Right? That's one of the three sort of criteria, right? Physical, mental, and also suffering spiritually. So no matter what kind of adjective I put in front of the noun alcoholic, right? So I am an alcoholic. That's the noun. I could say, well, I'm a mild alcoholic. Well, take away the word mild. What's the noun? Alcoholic. Well, I'm a moderate alcoholic. I'm an occasional alcoholic. I'm a slight alcoholic. I don't care what modifier you try to put in front of alcoholic. Alcoholic, I break out in craving. And this never occurs in the average temperate drinker. We covered that last week as well, too, or last week before, whenever it was, on Roman numeral 28, right at the very top. The normal temperate drinker, all those other people in our lives, are normal spouses and children and parents and friends, coworkers. They never break out in craving. Do they sometimes drink too much? Absolutely. On purpose? Absolutely. Not on purpose? Absolutely. But they don't have an allergic reaction. They do not break out in craving. Right? That is reserved to the real alcoholic. And thank you for those definitions again, Sam. So the manifestation of an allergy, the evidence of an allergy, the appearance of an allergy, which differentiates these people and sets them apart as a distinct entity. I know I'm repeating myself over and over. It's such an important concept here, guys. Have to understand. This is what makes us different from other drinkers. Breakout in craving. It's my allergic response, my abnormal response to alcohol. And it's never been, by any treatment with which we're familiar, permanently eradicated. This was written in, published in 1939, started writing it a couple of years before that-ish, right? And here we are today, 2023, 80 plus years later. I think we're in the same position. Still has not been eradicated. Now, we all love hearing about what's the latest thing that's coming on the market, right? Antabuse was a thing a while ago, and then there's what's some of this other stuff, Natrexol, I don't even know. Science keeps trying to find something to keep us from being alcoholics. But in my experience and my understanding, unless they're going to figure out how to put God in a pill that I can swallow, I'm not sure there's going to be a solution. And also, by the way, I wouldn't want it. So the only relief we have to suggest is entire abstinence. And this becomes evident in those earlier pages from the doctor here too. What happens when I drink? I break out in craving. Things are injurious. Bad stuff happens. So why don't I just have entire abstinence? Why don't I just not drink? This is what our friends and family fundamentally never understand about us. Dude, just don't drink tonight. Dude, just have 2 drinks tonight. I can't not drink. I can't keep it to 2. Because yeah, the craving is going to kick in, but that mental obsession is going to tell me, I will just have a couple. I need to have a couple, and tonight's going to be different. It's not going to be like last night, last week, last month.
So yeah, we have this allergy. Anytime we have an allergy, if you go to the doctor and they tell you that you have a sulfa allergy, they're gonna say, all right, now everywhere you go, let them know you got this sulfa allergy. You can never ever safely have sulfa again. And it's the same thing with whether it's strawberries, nuts, and alcohol. Every single time we will put whatever allergen in our body, we're gonna break out. In this instance, we're going to break out in craving, and that abstinence alone is not going to work, because this disease, it's internal, it's a spiritual condition, right? And David definitely touched on that cycle again, that I have this this allergy, and the reason that I don't think about my sulfa allergy is because I don't have this spiritual malady when it comes to my sulfa allergy that's going to fuel that mental obsession, that's going to tell me whatever lie that I need to believe so that I pick up again. And every single time that spiritual malady will get me to thinking, you know what, this time is going to be different. This time I will just have 2. This time I'm just going to, use a different substance. So we only have a spiritual experience to offer here.
That's a great point that Heather's talking about. I had a woman ask me in another big book study. She's like, well, if someone has a bee sting, they do everything they can not to get stung again if they're allergic to bees, right? They have it one time, their throat closes up, they have a really scary, and they get the EpiPen or whatever. And Heather, I love when she talks about some of these health stuff because she's a nurse, right? So she's got some great perspective on the sort of practical implications of some of these things. So this woman said, well, if I know I'm allergic to bees and I do everything to stay away from getting stung, how come I don't treat alcohol that way? And my response was, if you got the effect produced that you wanted from getting stung by a bee, despite the severe reaction you had, you better believe you would go diving headfirst into a beehive at every tree you passed, right? Because again, it would be injurious and my head would blow up and I'd have 100 stingers in my face. But if I got what I needed from getting stung by a bee, I'd say to hell with the allergy. And that's what we do when it comes to alcohol.
All right. So this immediately precipitates us into a seething cauldron of debate. Much has been written pro and con, but among physicians, the general opinion seems to be that most chronic alcoholics are doomed.
Do we have the definition of doomed?
I have a couple definitions in
Okay,
here.
go ahead.
I had seething cauldron, which is a hot kettle. So then this immediately precipitates us into a hot kettle of a debate. And then I have chronic, which is constantly reoccurring, and doomed, which is unhappy fate, hence ruin or death. So much has been written pro and con, but among physicians, the general opinion seems to be that the most constantly reoccurring alcoholics are doomed to basically death, ruin, or death.
Yeah, I was hoping you were going to have that definition of doom, right? Bill's being Dr. Silkworth rather being colorful here, shifting around his language a little bit. He's talking about death. Right? He's talking about death. So, this immediately precipitates us into a seething cauldron of debate. So all of these positions here and the statements that he's drawing is going to cause, a lot of hot arguments, pro and con. In 1939, among physicians, general opinion was most alcoholics are doomed. Most alcoholics are going to die. Right? They didn't have an effective treatment. And what was their experience? Their experience was alcoholics would come to them, be forced to them, come in with delirium tremens if they try to stop drinking. They come in with wet brains. They had no solution. And I'm sure in previous studies we've talked about all the various things, and more of it will come up later, and more about alcoholism, all the various treatments, belladonna and water treatment, and all these things that were tried, lobotomies. Go ahead, Heather.
All right, let's just move on to the next part. What was the solution? Perhaps I can best answer this by relating to one of my experiences. About 1 year prior to this experience, a man was brought in to be treated for chronic alcoholism. That man was Hank Parkhurst. He had but partially recovered from a gastric hemorrhage, which is like a GI bleed, and seemed to be a case of pathological mental deterioration. He had lost everything worthwhile in life and was only living, one might say, to drink. He frankly admitted and believed that for him there was no hope. Following the elimination of alcohol, there was to be no permanent brain injury. He accepted the plan outlined in this book. 1 year later, he called to see me, and I experienced a very strange sensation. I knew the man by name and partly recognized his features, but there all resemblance ended. From a trembling, despairing, nervous wreck had emerged a man brimming over with self-reliance and contentment. I talked with him for some time, but was not able to bring myself to feel that I had known him before. To me, he was a stranger, and so he left me. A long time has passed with no return to alcohol.
Sam, I know you got some words before we start to talk about Hank a little.
Yep. I had pathological, which is abnormal or diseased-like. He had but partially recovered from a gastric hemorrhage, and seemed to be a case of an abnormal or diseased-like mental deterioration. And then I also had self-reliance and contentment. So self-reliance is reliance upon one's own efforts or powers, etc. And contentment is ease of mind. So from a trembling, despairing, nervous wreck had emerged a man brimming over with reliance upon one's own efforts and powers, and contentment, ease of mind.
Heather, you want to share some of those notes you got on Hank? And Rob put a nice summary in the chat too. I can read that one after you share your notes.
So I just have a little bit of history on him. He was a salesman. He did not stay sober. And I know part of that is he didn't live up to his sex ideal. He was having an affair. He was married, had an affair with a woman named Ruth something. Maybe somebody else knows who that was. Um, and he wrote two employers in our book. It was the only chapter not written by Bill. And his story in the back of the big book was the unbeliever in the first edition. His big parts to the book were choose your own conception of God. That was his idea, and God is your own understanding. Both in the third step, and the big book wouldn't be around without him, because he was so persistent about making a big book and had to convince Bill of that. So um, that's all I've got written down for my history.
Awesome, thank you. So I'll just share because Rob put a nice little summary in here. And Ruth Hawk, who was the person who transcribed right, the book from verbal into written form, typed it up back in the day on a typewriter. So Hank Parkhurst's story was in the first edition of the big book titled The Unbeliever. Hank also wrote the chapter to employers, and a couple of these things, I'm repeating what Heather said. Hank was a high-pressure kind of guy. He was called a promoter among promoters. Hank Parkhurst was a business dynamo who was the first alcoholic to recover in New York following Bill Wilson. So he did recover, right? Did not die sober, as Heather said. Didn't stay sober, but he did recover at one point. Following Bill Wilson. Thus, Hank was New York's AA number 2. He was a vital contribution to AA. Without Hank Parkhurst, the big book might never have been published. Hank was born March 13th, 1895 in Marion, Iowa, into a family that had lived in that area for several generations. He was so gifted an entrepreneur, business person, right? Self-starting business person, that an associate once described him as being able to produce a good idea one good idea a minute for business. He'd been a Standard Oil of New Jersey executive who was fired because of his drinking. And those of you who have read the Chapter 2 Employers can see the perspective he had on this on both sides of the coin, right? Employer and employee. Hank sought treatment at Charles B. Towns Hospital in Manhattan. He met Bill Wilson there during the autumn of 1935. So just a little history. So what are some of the things that are mentioned in this paragraph? So we got a little story about Hank falling apart, and I'm sure Heather, from a nurse's perspective, could even give some more content on gastric hemorrhage and pathological mental deterioration without us knowing what either of those things really mean. It's like onomatopoeia. They sound horrible. Lost everything worthwhile in life, was only living, one might say, to drink. Anybody relate to that? He frankly admitted and believed that for him there was no hope. Sounds like a good place to be. Sound like step one to anybody. Following the elimination of alcohol, there was found to be no permanent brain injury. He's pretty lucky. He accepted the plan outlined in this book. What's that plan? 12 steps, a little service, a little unity, right? And then, has anybody had this experience? Guys, first of all, Zoom has been incredible. I've said it many times in this study and many others. I've met so many people and friends and peers. It's been incredible. God bless the pandemic for bringing effective Zoom meetings and groups and studies together. It's fantastic. But if you've only gone to Zoom meetings, and if you've never gone to live, or you've replaced live meetings with Zoom, guys, do yourself a favor. Get out in live meetings. We look different in person. And not only do yourself a favor and get in live meetings, get into service carrying the message to people that are in worse shape from you. Get a treatment center commitment. It will change your life. David and I have got a couple a month we're doing right now. It's two of my favorite nights of the week. We were there last week together. He's on his luxury cruise, so he won't be with me, but I'm going this Friday. Maybe I'll take Heather with me. Love carrying the message in these treatment centers. And the reason why I bring this up is I cannot tell you how many times I've seen people in treatment centers that I don't even know how they're allowed to be outside the hospital. They are in so physically rough shape, right? They look like they're at death's door. And week after week, sometimes month after month, they look like an entirely different person. I have seen this happen. And guys, I had this experience myself. After I'd been sober about 9 months or so, I went to my physician. I knew my physician well at the time because my mom was a doctor. It was a colleague of hers. That's why I went to him. And he looked at me and said, "What's different? What's going on with you?" And I was like, nothing. He's like, "Did you lose some weight?" I said, "No, same weight." He's like, what's going on?" So I've been sober 9 months. He's like, "Yeah." Like, that'll do it. I looked entirely different to this guy, right? It wasn't like the Hank Parkhurst experience, but my doctor saw it all over my face, right? That I had my spiritual experience, my spiritual awakening. I was living a new right life, and it was physically evident, right? Probably the eyes weren't as baggy. Maybe they weren't as bloodshot. Maybe I didn't have the nervous energy. But what are all the ways that I was observed to be different? Guys, this is what happens to us. We get this spiritual experience. We have this spiritual awakening described in page 27. And I don't know how many times I'm going to mention page 27 before we get there at this pace, probably 2,700 times. When I have that spiritual awakening, which is the promise of the 12th step, everything inside me, inside my head, my heart, and my gut, is going to get fixed up by a power greater than me. And everybody around me is not only going to see it, but they're going to benefit by it.
I wanted to wrap back real quick. He frankly
Please.
admitted and believed that for him there was no hope, and the more hopeless somebody is, the more hope there is. If I'm riding on a moderate amount of pain that I can tolerate, the chances that I'm going to just keep hanging on to that moderate amount of pain, that I'm still getting through, I'm still getting to work, I'm still taking care of my kids, it just sucks, the less of a chance there is that I'm going to really surrender and say, you know what, I'm going to do all this stuff. When it's really, really painful, I'm really, really hopeless. I mean, this guy's got an internal bleed, right? He's losing his mind, and he's like, I'm going to die, or I'm going to do whatever you guys suggest to me. But when I still think that I got a little bit under control, I'm still, making it to work. So what they're saying is that the more hopeless we are, the more hope there is. When we meet somebody out in a meeting who are like, oh my gosh, they're so hopeless, I don't think I can do something. There is a lot of hope for them. We're hopeless, we work the steps, we have a spiritual awakening. And then I used to have this picture of me that I put on my bathroom mirror. It was in the midst of my drinking, and it was 6 months later. I had done a split screen to remind myself, like, the difference in how I looked, my eyes, and what this doctor is saying is that it was who he was. The depth of who he was different. And I'm sure that we've all experienced that. If we've been around the rooms enough, we'll see somebody come in just hopeless, and 6 months later, they're just a joy to be around, and that look in their eyes, the color of their skin.
All right, let's plow forward. We're going to wrap this just on time.
All right. Oh,
it's okay. We're okay.
When I need a mental uplift, I often think of another case brought in by a physician prominent in New York. The patient had made his own diagnosis, and deciding his situation hopeless, had hidden in a deserted barn, determined to die. He was rescued by a searching party, and in desperate condition brought to me. Following his physical rehabilitation, he had a talk with me in which he was frankly stated he thought the treatment a waste of effort unless I could assure him, which no one ever had, that in the future he would not have the willpower, that he would have the will.
There you go. Yep.
He would have the willpower to resist the impulse to drink.
You got some notes on who this is?
Yes, this is Fitz Mayo, and he has the story Our Southern Friend. And that's in all of our editions. I don't know what page that is. It's in the 4th edition, right?
Page 208 to 218.
I don't have a whole lot written about him. I know on page 215 he's got a cool one of his own versions of the third step prayer, which is pretty cool to check out. And page 56 in our big book, 56 to the top of 57 is a whole nother story about him.
So there's a little thing here. Rob's on it again. Fitz
Good.
Mayo, big book author, our Southern friend, pages 208, 218. John Henry Fitzhugh Mayo, commonly called Fitz, was the big book, our Southern friend. He was among the first few to get sober in New York, probably the second after Hank Parkhurst. He's been described as a blue blood, that means old money, from Maryland. The son of an Episcopal clergyman, he attended a church school where he became rebellious at what he thought an overdose of religious education. When the group was trying to decide on the name for the book, Fitz, because of his close proximity to Washington, was asked to go to the Library of Congress to find out how many books were called The Way Out. Again, Joe and Charlie give a nice little history on a few different names that the early group were considering, including The Way Out. Fitz reported that the Library of Congress had 25 books entitled The Way Out and 12 entitled The Way. There were none called Alcoholics Anonymous. That settled the matter. And here was the reference Heather made to page 215. God, here I am, and here are all my troubles. I've made a mess of things and can't do anything about it. You take me and all my troubles and do anything you want with me. There's a nice, tidy little version of the third step prayer, isn't it? And the key is, yes, please, for the love of God, help me. Why? Because then do anything you want with me. And I'll just add, so the patient made his own diagnosis. Another little allusion, perhaps, to step one, admitting he was, alcoholic, powerless over alcohol, rather, couldn't manage his own life. And then, what did he ask for when people went to offer him help? Well, he said, what you're bringing to me, despite what you're telling me about how you understand the illness and your solution from it, you have to, the only way I'm going to get involved with this is if you assure me I'm going to have the willpower to resist the impulse to drink. Thank God that's not our solution, guys. Right? We would be in a whole heap of trouble, and no one has ever made that promise to me. I'm going to get plenty of power, but it's not going to come from my will.
The only note I want to make is, again, it says that he was hopeless and in desperate condition before we go on. So that's how he his story aligns with Hank's. All right, so his alcoholic problem was so complex and his depression so great that we felt his only hope would be through what we then called moral psychology, and we doubted if even that would have any effect.
Go ahead and read through the end. There's just a little bit more.
However, he did become sold on the ideas contained in this book. He has not had a drink for a great many years. I see him now and then, and he is a fine specimen of manhood as one could wish to meet. I earnestly advise every alcoholic to read this book through, and perhaps he came to scoff. He may remain to pray.
Sam?
I do have earnestly, which is seriously. I seriously advise every alcoholic to read this book through, and though perhaps he came to scoff, he may remain to pray.
Do you have moral psychology?
I did, and
I know
then
Howard had this for us last week too, exactly how Bill Wilson was doing it. I don't know if you got that handy again, Howard. We could share that. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Sam, but Howard had a great reference from something else that Bill had talked about.
I would rather have the Howard stuff.
You don't want to be one-upped?
No.
All right, well, if Howard's got it, please share it with us. But what else you got on this, Heather, to conclude things?
I know that at the very end here, this is the one part he says he may remain to pray. The one time Dr. Silkworth says, you know what, the solution is God. You got to pray. We got to be hopeless. The 12 steps, that spiritual awakening.
Rob's got it here. Oh boy. Psychic Change, Moral Psychology. Bill melded Silkworth's cogent definition of the problem, the spiritual solutions suggested by Jung, and the spiritual tools of the Oxford Group into a program able to affect the psychic change Silkworth deemed to be required to recovery. From Dr. Silkworth, The Doctor Who Loved Drunks, page Roman numeral 18. Moral philosophy is the branch of philosophy that contemplates what is right and wrong, explores the nature of morality, and examines how people should live their lives in relation to others. Moral philosophy has three branches. One branch, meta-ethics, investigates big picture questions such as, what is morality? What is justice? Is there truth? And how can I justify my beliefs as better than conflicting beliefs held by others? Wow. All right, that's heavy duty stuff. Bert, you're definitely going to want a copy of that.